Hello! In today's video I put 56 Alice in Borderland characters into Squid Game to see who would win. I'm not going to individually name every character because that'd be pretty boring. Instead, they're on screen right now. However, all of these characters will be in debt. In the show, they could be the richest people on the planet, but in this version they're all going to be in debt. Also, they'd all be the version of themselves from just before they entered Borderland. For example, Arisu won't be the selfless person we know from Season 3, but instead he'd be this selfish version from the start of Season 1. That means that if someone does something seemingly out of character, things like that would probably play a crucial part in it. Since all these characters will be taken from when the meteor struck, let's say that the Squid Game is just a variation of Borderland for people in debt in this universe. The Watchman or the Front Man or whatever you want to call the Game Master would pick 456 people and not only give them another chance at life, but also give them a chance for almost 5 million yen. Apparently, that's equivalent to 45.6 billion won in South Korea. Another thing that's sort of important, in the original show, the closer you were to the meteor when it hit, the earlier you'd arrive in Borderland. That's why Shibuki arrived a couple days before Arisu and his friends. Something similar would happen here, except the closer you were to the meteor would decide which bed you get. The only reason I'm bringing this up is so that Arisu, Karube, and Chota's beds would be right next to each other since they were right next to each other in the cubicle. That would mean that they'd know about each other being in the games from the very start, and the same would go for Sota and Yuna plus Aguni and Takaru. I think I've covered everything, so let's begin. Two factors went into helping me decide whether or not a character would survive red light, green light. Firstly is their traits. If a character is impulsive or very easily scared, they'd probably die in the initial shock. The same thing goes for the opposite. If they're exceptional at staying calm and usually think things through before acting, they're going to be safe. The second way that helped me decide is when they're presented with danger. If they chose to run, they'd die. If they stood still or didn't run, they'd probably live. This method is a lot more unreliable since sometimes the objective of the game is to run, but when the objective of the game is anything but run or evade the danger by moving, then it'd work. For example, in the Good Future Bad Future game, the players are told in advance that they have to look out for flaming arrows. Since they are told the objective of the game is to avoid the arrows and all the players on this list survived, we can assume that if they are told to stay still no matter what, they'd be able to do that too and survive the initial shock. Unfortunately, Nobu gets very scared pretty easily, so he'd end up dying because he started shaking out of fear, and Tetsu would also start shaking from withdrawals or being high, so he'd die too. Tetsu would probably be the first to die, which initiates the initial shock. The rest would pass, however. I didn't include Arisu in that, but he'd still survive. When he first gets in danger, him, Karube, and Chota all freeze up instead of running, and Arisu almost always thinks things through before acting, even in the first game. Karube is a little impulsive, but not enough to run. Plus, he'd be smart enough not to run. Chota, on the other hand, he does get really scared very easily, but he's an anomaly. Until he becomes brave, literally every time he gets scared, he goes completely still and he stays still until the danger is gone or until someone snaps him out of it. He doesn't even shake at all or anything like that. Therefore, he'd manage to survive the initial shock, but even once it's over, he still won't move until Karube runs back to him and drags him along. Arisu would realize the doll is a motion tracker and there are snipers in the walls, so Karube would hide both of them behind him, then hide behind someone himself. Now let's speed run through everyone who would die. Matsushita dies in the initial shock because the first time he was truly in danger, he gave up almost immediately and he was also shaking a lot during that moment. Goken is very impulsive and stupid, so he'd get killed for running in the initial shock, probably thinking he could outrun the bullets. The first time we see Momoka in danger, she isn't actually in danger at all. She sees Arisu and her head immediately snaps towards him, meaning she'd probably snap her head towards it as soon as she hears the first or second gunshot. Damon is either always panicking or always flailing around, so she dies in the initial shock. When Nitobe was first in danger, he actually froze up, but the second he sees others running, he'd probably run with them, so he gets killed in the initial shock. We never see Nozomi in a game, but the fact that she survived Borderland isn't enough to say that she survives, because if everyone who survived Borderland ended up winning, that'd just be lazy and boring. So the fact that she avoided the Queen of Spades game shows that she is probably bad in high-pressure situations and only survived through luck. That means she'd probably get out by either shaking or she'd run in the initial shock. Ippy would definitely start shaking or flinch at all the gunshots too much even if he survived the initial shock. Jin did choose fight but then immediately switched up to flight in his first fight or flight situation and also heavily panicked, so he's cooked, assuming he was a militant. The other militants don't like taking innocent lives, but if the lives they take are guilty of something bad, then they probably aren't bothered at all, and also in this situation they aren't taking the lives, so they wouldn't panic or start shaking and therefore survive. That goes for all militants. I am going to point out 3 just to add extra detail. Seiko is the only one who seemed like she was enjoying killing all the innocents, so she easily clears the game. To begin with, Season 1 Niragi puts up a tough facade, but deep down he's kind of a coward. He could still survive, but he'd probably struggle the most out of all the militants. I don't think I need to mention Aguni, but he'd clear it the easiest. He stands still and does nothing for a lot of the time he's on screen. Plus, I don't think we ever saw him panic. In the King of Spades game, Anne stopped running and put herself in a lot of danger to try saving someone. She'd probably do the same in this game like Gi Hun did for Nam Do, except this time there's no Hun Ju to step in and help her, so they'd get caught moving. Season is very impulsive and his friend, Ya Main, is almost always the first to run. I don't know whether this means he's really smart or impulsive, but for simplicity I'm going to say it's because he's impulsive. Similarly, when we first see Heya, she immediately starts panicking and is the first to run before the danger even showed itself. Remember that this is Heya when she first ever entered Borderland and not the Heya we see later in Season 2. Asahi is the exact same as Momoka, if not worse. Minami is the first to die in the show, and she is abysmal at staying calm, so she could die literally any possible way in this game. Taro would run in the initial shock since he usually just follows what looks like the majority. This is the version of Last Boss when he entered the Borderlands, so he'd probably get out due to shaking. Finally, for the deaths might be surprising, but I don't think Mira would make it through this game. I don't know how true this is, but she used to be a psychiatrist, and apparently the reason she chose to become a citizen is because she was sad that her patients would leave her as soon as they got better. Remember that she isn't the Queen of Hearts since this is her first time in Borderland. This means that before she entered the Borderlands, she would have been very emotional, and I'm pretty sure that before she dies, Arisu and Usagi started bringing that side of her back out again. Therefore, I feel like that's enough proof she can get very emotional, which would also imply she isn't good at staying calm and can get scared relatively easily. Now that we're done with the ones that would die, I'm going to quickly go over a list that would survive, since I think that most of these I don't need to explain why. For certain people, I will explain why I think they'd survive. Kuma, Kuina, King of Spades, Yaba, Ikeno, Rei, Risa, Ruji, Kyuzuru, Shitara, Chishiya, Banda, Soda, Takumi, Takaru, Takuma, Yurumi, Kisaragi, Usagi, and Mano. I might just be biased, but I put Tada on the survivors list. He does get scared easily, but he'd definitely be hiding in the back of the crowd, meaning he'd be behind everyone. That means he won't be picked up shaking by the motion detector. If Gi-hun didn't get picked up moving in Season 1 and he wasn't even at the back, Tada wouldn't get picked up either. When he gets scared, he doesn't try run, he just sits there in fear. That means he wouldn't run in the initial shock, and then once it's over and the gunshots are gone, his shaking would drastically reduce, so he'd be able to just barely clear it. Shibuki can very quickly adapt to the things around her because she was already great at surviving the Borderlands after just one game, and also was the first to get over the confusion and steal the wolf roll, then run in the Seven of Hearts. Soda would hide Yuna right behind her like young Seek did with Gumjar, even though they didn't know the doll's eyes were motion sensors. And with that, we have covered everyone who'd survive red light, green light. Voting was made specially for Gi-hun, but I included it here anyway because I like the voting, and also the bathroom fight and Lights Out need voting to happen. I don't like the reason Lights Out started in Season 1, and none of the characters here would do something like that. I'll put what each character voted on screen since I feel like individually going over each player and why they voted what they did would be boring. I wouldn't be able to do the pentathlon because Alice in Borderland and its characters are Japanese, whereas the Squid Game and its characters are Korean. However, I still wanted a team game so I could get the characters into groups. Tug of War is the only other team game, but I feel like groups of 10 would be too much to keep track of, so I kept it 5 to keep it simple. Therefore, Game 2 would be Tug of War with groups of 5. I didn't want to put people on a team with background characters, and there's 37 characters. That means 2 main characters wouldn't find a team by the end of the game, and just like Minyo, they'd get to skip the game. To decide who'd survive the game, firstly, I had to get them into teams. In Team 1, Gokun died in the first game, so Kuma's band would be a group of 4, so in spot 5 I put Kazuya. I picked him because he'd see that this team is already strong, and also I couldn't find any other team for him. In Team 2, I put Takeru and Aguni since they'd be together. Then Nuragi would seek out whoever looks the strongest, which would be Aguni. Seiko would be similar, but she'd also see that all of them are O voters, and finally, it seems like Aguni handpicked the militants based off of the reaction he had with Usagi when they joined the beach. Therefore, he'd probably find Mikado, and since he voted O, I feel like he's the best person in the militants that Aguni would pick. On Team 3, Chishiya would find Quina among the crowd. In the actual show, she saw potential in both Arisu and Quina, which is why she teamed up with both of them. Firstly, she'd find Quina, then Arisu would be with Karube and Chota. Karube would initially be reluctant to let Chishiya and Quina join, but Chishiya would either prove they're worthy or Arisu would stick up for them. In Team 4, we had the King of Spades, Kyuzaru, Risa, Yaba, and Banda. I put all 5 of these together because they all chose to become citizens and they're also all formidable, so they'd probably all see potential in each other. Also, I'm going to be completely honest, I didn't know who else to put most of these with. In Team 5, we'd have the 3 remaining militants and then Soda and Yuna. They'd see potential in Soda, and Soda would make sure his sister gets in the group. Natsu and Shion would probably find each other naturally, just like how Hunju and Young Mi did. Usagi would see Ruji, and they wouldn't know that if you don't get into a team, you get to skip the game, so she'd try and save Ruji by teaming up with him. Those 2 duos and Shibuki would find each other naturally because the timer would be running out soon, meaning they don't have many other options and they don't want to risk being the 2 people without a team. The final team I kind of just put together because there was only 7 people left to pick from now. Yurumi would have been rejected from most teams since she would probably annoy them, plus most of the people she would have manipulated or taken advantage of died in red light, green light. Sachiko would basically be Gumjar if Young Seek never got invited to the games. She'd be rejected from every team and there'd be no one else to back her up. That means that Akeno, Mono, Tata, Takuma, and Rei are a team since they're the only main characters left that would be able to get a team. Now in every team, I assign the players a number between 1 and 5. Number 1 would mean the player is weak, number 2 would mean they're average, number 3 would mean they're strong, number 4 would mean they're really strong, and number 5 would mean they're basically a tank. Once I did that, I added up the team's total strength. For example, Kuma received a 5, Kisaragi received a 4, Takumi received a 2, Shitara received a 2, and Kazuya received a 5. That would mean their total team strength is 18. I did the same thing for Team 2, which should be on screen right now, and now Team 3 should have just came on the screen, then Team 4 should be on now, then Team 5, then Team 6, and finally Team 7. In the show, 201 players survived red light, green light. We'll up that to 202 since there'd be 2 people without a team. That means that 200 people would be in a team, and 200 divided by 5 is 40. That means there'd be 40 teams total in Tug of War. I didn't want too many main characters to die in the second game, but I didn't want everyone to survive. However, we only have 7 teams with main characters. That would mean that at least 1 team is forced to fight background characters. I decided to add another 2 teams full of background characters for the main characters to go against. I explained that horribly, but if you didn't understand, then it shouldn't be too hard to see what I did when I actually start the game. For the 3 teams of background characters, I used a random number generator to decide the strength score the team would get. In Team 8, it rolled 4 3s in a row and then 1 2, which brought the total strength to 14. In Team 9, we got a 1, 3, 1, 1 and 5, then in Team 10 we had a 1, 4, 1, 2, and a 5, giving them a total strength score of 11 and 13 respectively. Then, I used the random number generator again, but this time to decide which teams would fight against each other. If I got a repeat number, I'd just roll again. For example, if the numbers generated were Team 3 versus Team 6, then the generator picked Team 3 versus Team 4. We can't have one team fight multiple times, so I generated a number again. I don't remember if it did, but if two teams full of background characters were put against each other, I'd generate again, since there'd be no point of two extra background character teams if they're never going to be brought up again. Finally, the winner of the game is decided by whichever team has more points. The first battle picked was Team 8 versus Team 4. Team 4 won by 3 points, meaning the King of Spades, Banda, Yaba, Kyuzuru, and Risa all cleared the game. The next battle was Team 2 versus Team 9, and Team 2 won by 6 points, so Takeru, Aguni, Niragi, Seiko, and Mikado cleared the game. The next battle picked was Team 6 versus Team 10, and Team 6 won by 1 point, so it would have been a really close battle, but Usagi, Natsu, Shion, Shibuki, and Ruji would have cleared the game. The next battle was Team 3 versus Team 7, and Team 3 won by 4 points, meaning Arisu, Karube, Chota, Chishiya, and Kuino won. However, this would mean that Rei, Takuma, Tada, Ikeno, and Mono all got eliminated. Finally, Team 1 was put against Team 5, and Team 1 cleared by 5 points, meaning Kuma, Kisaragi, Takumi, Shitara, and Kazuya survived, but Sugi, Ken, Jin, Sota, and Yuna all died. With that, tug of war concluded. For Mingle, I just took the number of rounds they had in the show. In round 1, 10 people would have been called out. I didn't want anyone dying in round 1, especially not 7 people. Therefore, I filled a room with 3 background characters, but after this round people do start dying. I'm still going to go over who went with who, as this is where teams that were already formed start to expand. For example, in Room 1, Arisu and Usagi's team met up, and after this game ended, everyone in this room who survived the game would have ended up on one big team. Room 2, Aguni's team and Banda's team would have met up. Room 3 would have Kuma's band. Kazuya would stay with Kuma initially. I put Sachiko and Yurumi in this team just so they didn't have 5 background characters, and also I didn't want to kill anyone off in round 1. In round 2, however, rooms of 4 would be called. Arisu and Karube would have been the only ones willing to sacrifice, since Usagi would have to abandon Ruji if she had to sacrifice. Natsu also probably wouldn't have let Shion risk her life by leaving the group, since they were already sort of best friends after Game 1 in Alice in Borderland, so it'd be similar here. I say sacrifice, but it isn't really a sacrifice. It's kind of just temporarily leaving the alliance to find another group so the other 8 can get into rooms of 4. Shion would then offer to get into a room with Chishiya, Kuina, and Chota, so those 4 would be safe, along with Ruji, Usagi, Natsu, and Shibuki. Kuma would offer to sacrifice so his band and Kazuya could get into a room, but Kazuya would sacrifice instead. Arisu would spot Kazuya and Yurumi without a group amongst the crowd, so Karube would run to Kazuya and Arisu would run to Yurumi, and they'd all get in a room together. Takeru would use the move Thanos used when he kicked out Gyeongsu, but instead Takeru would kick out Mikado. The citizens all seem selfish, so they wouldn't be able to decide on who has to sacrifice, so it'd just be whoever can run into a room the fastest. Risa and the King of Spades are easily making this. Someone would trip Kyuzuru over, since Kyuzuru probably would have been one of the first to run since he's the smartest and would have expected this room, but he also probably would have been one of the slowest, so people could catch up to him. That means Banda and Yaba can also make it into the room. That would leave Kyuzuru, Saichiko, and Mikado without a room, so all of them would be eliminated. Once this round is over, Kazuya would meet back up with Kuma, Yurumi would be alone again, and Karube and Arisu would return to their group. In round 3, rooms of 3 would be called out. In room 1, Arisu, Karube, and Chota would obviously go together. Usagi wouldn't leave Ruji, and Shion would let Natsu run with them, as they have been on their team since last game, whereas the other 2 they just met in this game. Chishiya and Kuina would go together, and Shion would go with them too, since Natsu went into room 2, which leaves Shibuki behind. Banda, Yaba, Risa, and the King of Spades would run again, except this time, the King of Spades would try tripping the nearest person to him. However, that would be Risa, as those two are the fastest. Trying to trip Risa would be a mistake, as she would dodge, kick, and stun him, so Risa, Yaba, and Banda get in a room. Niragi wouldn't leave Aguni's side as he's the strongest, and Aguni wouldn't leave Takaru's side, so instead of talking it out, all three of them run, which leaves Seiko. Kyuma and Kazuya would let Kisaragi, Takumi, and Shitara all go in a room together. Kazuya and Kyuma would waste no time finding another person, which would be Seiko, so they'd get into a room. The chances of all three of these people finding each other and then getting into a room is really low, so Shibuki, the King of Spades, and Yurumi would all die. Shibuki isn't the most likable person, so people may be sad, but Shibuki's death wouldn't affect anyone. Then rooms of 6 would be called. Arisu would tell Karube and Chishiya to come with him, so the other 6 can get in a room. Those 3 would then meet up with Kyuma's band, and Kyuma and Kazuya would once again sacrifice so those 2 trios can form a full group of 6. Meanwhile, Aguni's group would be a group of 7, meaning one person has to be kicked out, and it's not going to be Seiko, Aguni, Takaru, or Niragi, so Banda, Yaba, and Risa start literally fighting to decide who goes. Kyuma and Kazuya spot this, so take the opportunity to sneak in, and then Kyuma, Kazuya, Seiko, Niragi, Aguni, and Takaru all go in a room, and the 3 that are fighting realize too soon as they are eliminated. All 3 groups of main characters are now basically right next to each other on the elevator, so literally anyone could run with anyone. We're also at even numbers, and the last number called is 2, so everyone would survive, but if you're interested, on screen should be who I think would go with who in the last game. I once again used the random number generator, but this time it was to decide who would be in the bathroom. It would be the boys' bathroom, so I only put the men on here since that's what it was in the show. To decide who'd go into the bathroom, I used the order on the tier list. Then I generate a number per character for each character. If a character got 6, then they'd be in the bathroom. If a character got 7, they'd be in the dorms. Chishiya would be in the bathroom, but he'd avoid the fight completely. Arisu, Chota, and Karube would try doing the same, but Arisu and Chota would each individually get attacked by an O voter. Karube would run in and save Arisu first, then they'd run to Chota. However, Chota would be stabbed in the leg by a shard of glass, causing him to be injured and finding it hard to walk, just like he did when he got burned in the 3 of clubs. After that, they'd be able to get out of the bathroom. Aguni would be attacked but easily stop his opponent. I don't think he'd kill the opponent, but they'd be knocked out at least. Meanwhile, Niragi probably would have instigated the fight and would have gotten a kill with the fork. Kyuma would try avoiding the fight, but Shitara would get caught up with it. Shitara would actually end up dying here because the attacker would have had a weapon, and this would have been a pivotal moment for Kyuma. After losing 2 of his friends, he doesn't want to lose another, so he plans to switch his vote to X. Also, to be completely honest, I didn't want an empty space here, so I had to kill someone. All the X's and Ruji would be on one side, and all the O's would be on another, just like in Season 2. They'd quickly realize that the O's will come and attack them. They decide they're going to hide under the beds, and Arisu wants to tell everyone to hide, but Chishiya knows that if they do, the O's would catch on quickly. That would mean that just the main characters that voted X are hiding under the bed. Meanwhile, on the O side, Niragi and Seiko would kill as many people as possible. Kyuma and his friends would avoid the fight, including Kazuya, as he'd want to stay loyal. They wouldn't go after the person who killed Shitara, as Kyuma isn't the type of person to seek revenge. Takaru and Aguni would stick together. Aguni is reluctant to go out of his way to murder people, but Takaru has literally gone crazy with greed like Namgyu, except worse. This would quickly start to dawn on Aguni with every kill Takaru gets. Things truly start to go wrong when Arisu watches somebody get attacked right next to him, and he can't just sit there and let them die, so he runs out and tries protecting the person. He tells the person being attacked to run, but the attacker has a weapon, and Karube knows Arisu doesn't have it in him to kill this person or maybe hurt them. Because of this, Karube also runs out to protect Arisu. I assume the attacker would be pretty strong, and with a weapon, Karube and Arisu aren't going to win this fight. They start to lose the fight until Chota drops down and tackles the O to the floor just like he did with Shibuki. Karube takes this opportunity to knock the attacker out. Since they are already exposed now, they can't hide back under again because then they'd compromise everyone else's hiding spot, so Arisu grabs the weapon and then he helps Karabei carry Chota. Unfortunately, things go really wrong when Takaru finds them. Takaru would charge at them, so Karube would have to leave Chota to Arisu and Arisu would quickly find somewhere to hide Chota and rush in to save Karube. Takaru was already losing the fight, so when Arisu steps in, Aguni also has to step in. Karabei and Aguni start fighting and Aguni is winning, but Arisu and Takaru start fighting and it's pretty balanced since they both have weapons. Eventually, both of them get disarmed. Chota would see both of them losing and get panicked, so he knows the only way to save his friends is to step in. He tries running out from his hiding spot and helping both of them, but because his leg is injured, he falls over. Arisu is stunned for a few seconds after seeing Chota run out of his spot, so Takaru punches him to the floor and darts over to the weapons. He grabs one, but instead of running to Arisu, he runs over to Chota. Arisu recovers just in time to see it happen. Chota is stabbed. Aguni and Karube stop fighting and just stagnate from shock. Karube is in shock after seeing Chota die, and Aguni is in shock because he realizes just how insane his friend has went after seeing him kill one more person, and he's shocked his best friend could go this far. He also starts to feel guilt after seeing the devastating effect this had on Karube, and the weight of what he has assisted in truly starts to set in. Brimming with rage, Arisu grabs the other weapon and sprints over to Takaru. In a flash of pure rage, Arisu kills Takaru and immediately after, the lights come on and the guards rush in. Dropping his knife, Arisu and Karube dart over to Chota as he bleeds out and dies. Arisu doesn't know whether to be more traumatized over the fact that Chota died or the fact that he just killed someone. As soon as he realizes Takaru died, Aguni's shock and guilt is immediately replaced with pure rage and malice. Since there's no Gi-hun, there's no rebellion. I once again randomized the team, however there was like 10 seekers and 5 hiders, so I did randomize it again to get better numbers. The teams should be on screen, however. I think some people would definitely want to swap. Aguni is dedicated to killing Arisu and Karube, so he'd swap with Ruji, who would want to be on the same team as Usagi. Chishiya knows that physical games aren't his strong suit, so he wouldn't want to be a seeker. He knows Niragi would want to swap, so they'd swap. Besides that, I think everyone would be fine on their teams, and even if you don't think they would be, let's just say they couldn't find anyone willing to swap. I also randomized what keys the blue team would get. With that, the game began. Ruji would have proposed the idea that they split up into groups of 2. Chishiya would end up without a partner since odd numbers, but I think he'd prefer being alone anyway. He'd probably go to the highest floor, and I honestly don't know how many floors there are. I think it's 2, but I'm going to say 3 since it'd be better for the story. Arisu would expand on Ruji's idea and say that each duo covers a different floor. Shion and Natsu would take the bottom floor, Ruji and Usagi would take the middle, Arisu and Karabei would take the top floor. Chishiya would probably pick the top floor since I feel like most seekers' first instinct would be to explore the middle and the bottom. I also feel like hiders would hide in the middle and the bottom, so even if a lot of seekers were going to make their way upstairs, they'd have more kills and therefore, the large majority wouldn't bother even looking for more. Even better, since the majority of hiders will never be upstairs since they either die or just never walk up, the exit would probably be up there. Therefore, Chishiya would probably be able to narrow down the exit even further, and maybe Arisu, but him and Karube could also just use trial and error even though the strategy is more risky. Since there'd be barely any seekers upstairs for at least the first half of the game, they'd manage to cover most of the rooms and maybe even start to have a layout. This would mean that Arisu and Karube find the exit between the 15 to 10 minute mark and Chishiya would be very shortly after them since he didn't use trial and error. They'd probably meet up, but Arisu and Chishiya have the same key, so they'd have to find a triangle. Very early on in the game, Kuma probably would have bumped into them. His strategy would be that he spends around 20 minutes on the top floor and Takumi spends about 20 on the bottom floor. Then when there's 10 minutes left on the timer, they'd meet up at the start, which would be in the middle, and then divide and conquer the middle floor too unless they both have a kill. Since Kuma met Arisu and Karube very early on in hide and seek and they were already acquainted from previous encounters in games like Mingle, I feel like Arisu could talk his way out of the situation. The chances of Kuma finding someone else, especially with his strategy, would be really high and he wouldn't want to kill someone like Arisu. Kuma would eventually find a background character on the top floors since even though there isn't many hiders up there, there is also no seekers to kill the hiders even if they're found, so Kuma could find someone up there. That person would be found dead by Chishiya as he's making his way to the exit, but he'd barely pay any attention. Once he bumps into Arisu and Karube, he'd probably tell them that there was a body there and fortunately, the body would have a triangle key. This means that all three of them could easily walk to the exit, but at this point there is only between 10 and 7 minutes left. That means that most of the seekers who started on the middle and bottom floors and still don't have a kill would start making their way upstairs. One of these people would be Aguni. I believe Aguni would have had the chance to get a kill, but he'd be so blinded by his rage at Arisu and Karube that he'd spare those people just like Gi-hun spared San Neo to find Dae-ho. After all, in the show he only wanted to kill the members of the beach because they turned his best friend crazy, but in the games, he wouldn't be able to go after the frontman since he wouldn't even know the frontman exists. After he killed all the innocents, he felt immense guilt. That means that Aguni wouldn't want to kill innocent hiders, but at this point in time, he wouldn't see Arisu and Karube as innocent as he's been overcome with emotion from seeing his friend die just like in Alice in Borderland. This time, instead of directing his rage to the people who made Takaru crazy, he'd direct his rage to the people who killed Takaru. Arisu would recognize this, and since they spent the first 2/3 of the game looking for the exit, him and Karube would have a pretty good layout of where everything is. This means that Arisu and Karube could give Chishiya both of their keys to let Chishiya open the exit. Then, Arisu and Karube would run towards a room that leads directly into a pit and Chishiya would run to the exit room. Aguni is focused on Arisu and Karube, so he'd just ignore Chishiya and keep chasing the other two. Aguni is probably significantly faster than all three of them, so they wouldn't be able to lap around, and if they stuck together, they wouldn't have enough time to open the exit. Chishiya would open the exit and clear the game. Meanwhile, Arisu and Karube would be hiding in a room with another door that leads directly to a pit. Since they know most if not all of the rooms on the top floor and where they now lead after searching for so long, both of them would know exactly where to go to get to this room with the pit. Arisu's plan is to knock Aguni into the pit and then they can both flee to the exit. Initially, they'd slam the door shut behind them, then Karube would hide in the corner of the room and Arisu would stand in front of the door leading to the pit. Aguni should come bursting through the door and since he doesn't see Karube, he'd charge at Arisu. Arisu would hastily open the door then dive to the side. As mentioned, the door would lead directly to the pit, so Aguni slows himself down before he falls in. Then, Karube would run out of the corner and ram into Aguni. Then Aguni would fall into the pit and Arisu and Karube could get back to the exit. However, something in the plan would go wrong and since there was no time to come up with a backup plan, Karube would eventually start wrestling Aguni to give Arisu time to run. After enough convincing, Arisu reluctantly runs away to the exit and he gets into the doorway of the exit when suddenly, the speakers call out that Aguni has passed and Arisu has been eliminated. Arisu falls to the floor and starts wailing like he did when he watched Karube die in the Seven of Hearts. Since he ran and left him, Arisu would blame himself for Karube's death just like in Alice in Borderland. Since he hasn't fully entered the exit as he's just in the doorway and he's wailing out, his screams can be heard. Multiple people could hear his cries. Niragi, Seiko, Usagi, and Aguni. At the start of the game, Ruji wouldn't have actually prioritized finding the exit, just staying safe. Therefore, just before the 2 minutes were up, him and Usagi would hide in a room. Since they were on the middle floor, they would have been found pretty early on in the game. Niragi's first instinct would probably be to run straight forward into the maze to be the first person to get a kill. He'd quickly find Ruji and Usagi's room. We've seen Niragi can overpower Usagi with his bare hands, so if he has a knife then her and Ruji are cooked. Eventually, Usagi and Ruji would be able to escape the room, but Usagi would be injured. Since Ruji would find it really hard to go quickly downstairs like these, soon enough they'd be backed up into a corner. Ruji would realize he's just a burden on Usagi and they'd both be killed if Usagi doesn't leave him, so he convinces her that he has a plan and she has to run. She'd run all the way downstairs and find a room to hide in, but Ruji would be killed by Niragi. Would Ruji actually sacrifice for Usagi? In most situations I'd assume not, but in this situation they either both die or Usagi survives, so getting her killed too is futile. Niragi would almost immediately come to the same conclusion as Namgyu did, but even if he doesn't, he'd definitely just kill for fun anyway. Either way, he will continue killing other hiders. Usagi would leave a trail of blood from her injury, but Niragi wouldn't notice it. Eventually, he'd bump into Seiko, who managed to kill a background character. Since they both already have a kill and are looking for more, they'd team up and go searching for others. While searching the bottom floor, Seiko would follow the blood trail left by Usagi, except this time there is two, with one going down the stairs and one heading back up the stairs. Usagi would have met up with Natsu. Natsu and Shion would have had to split up early game because they would have prioritized finding the exit instead of finding a good room to hide in. Because of this, they'd have nowhere to hide when all the seekers were released. While hastily looking for a room, they'd see a seeker run round the corner, so they'd immediately start running. What they didn't know was that the seeker chasing them was Quina, and what Quina didn't know was that the hiders she was hunting were Natsu and Shion. Eventually, they'd reach a path that splits into two, so they'd split up, so one of them is guaranteed safety and the other just has to keep running. Quina follows Shion. Eventually, she loses sight of Shion, but she finds a room with an open door. That room is a room with stairs that lead up to the middle floor. Quina would have assumed the door is unlocked too, but when she gets up there she finds out that it isn't. Shion wouldn't have had the correct key to open the door at the top, just like Zhang Dae. Since Quina would catch up to her if she ran outside, she decided the next best option was to hide behind the door. Therefore, she waited until the seeker reached the bottom of the stairs, then she came charging out from behind the door and tackled the seeker to the ground. She started strangling the seeker just to realize it was Quina, however it was already too late as Quina stabbed Shion instinctually. Therefore, Quina passed the game, but Shion died, and Natsu would hear the announcement over the speakers. The resentment would start to build up, but Natsu would believe that Quina already has a kill, so it's safer to explore the bottom as there's one less seeker. Eventually, she thoroughly searches the entire bottom floor after she finds Shion's body and takes the key. At one point, she finds Kisaragi in a room. Kisaragi told Kuma and Takumi that she would stick to the left until she finds a good room, so Takumi and Kuma know where to go if they need her for anything. After Natsu finds Kisaragi, she leaves the room. Then about 10 to 20 seconds later, Takumi appears in the same room to update Kisaragi on Kuma's plan on how they're going to get kills. Kisaragi quickly tells Takumi that Natsu was just in the room and she tells him which direction she went. Takumi quickly finds Natsu and she starts to run, but she trips over. Takumi is about to take the kill when Seiko suddenly comes in and knocks him down too. Seiko would already have a kill, but she wants to increase the prize pool as much as possible. She'd try running again, but Seiko would be too fast. After getting stabbed in her foot, Natsu would kick Seiko off and take this opportunity to escape into a room. This is the point where Seiko finds Niragi, and while they're talking, Natsu has enough time to escape into a room. In the room, she'd see Usagi, who managed to slow her bleeding and stitch herself up for the most part. Once Natsu comes in, however, she'd realize that both of them would be leaving a blood trail directly into this room and Seiko would be following it. Knowing this, they limp all the way to the top floor where they hide themselves in a room to quickly try and stop the bleeding. She wouldn't manage to stop Natsu's, but she'd no longer be leaving a blood trail. It's too late to do anything else as she can hear the two seekers coming down the hall, so she leads them away. This would save Natsu and she wouldn't be found for the rest of the game. They'd be quickly gaining on Usagi, but just before they catch up, she hears Arisu's cries. They'd all hear this, and then Usagi would realize that they're going to split up so Seiko can get Usagi, then Niragi could get Arisu. She'd have to get to Arisu before them so she can save him. Once she reaches him, however, she'd see the exit and Arisu in the doorway. She'd run in, jump over Arisu like she jumped over Ruji in the final game, then pull Arisu fully into the room, so if the seekers entered, the guards would kill them since they aren't allowed in the exit. That would make both of them clear the game. Kazuya could easily get a kill, so he'd probably kill a background character. That'd just leave Takumi, who wouldn't have been able to find anyone after Natsu, so he'd die in front of Kuma and maybe kiss Aragi, who he'd go to find just to say goodbye and make sure she survived. With that, the game would conclude. Arisu would have been walking down the stairs to the dorm once Usagi pulled him into the exit, but as soon as he reaches his bed, he'd just collapse and give up. He'd be blaming himself for Kurube's death just like he did in the original show, and he'd just lie there, waiting for the guards to kill him. He'd abstain from the voting. Then when it's time to eat food, he'd skip out, and Usagi and Natsu would try to give him some, but he just wouldn't eat. Kuina and Chishiya would have been kicked out of the group because Natsu is resentful to Kuina because she killed Shion, which means that with no Arisu, the entire group just fell apart and everyone is now just a duo. Kuina would also try to cheer up Arisu, but he truly has just given up and lies there. Halfway through the night, Aguni goes to finish off Arisu, but then starts to have second thoughts after seeing the state he's in. When he hesitates, Arisu just flat out tells him he can do it, and suddenly all the hatred is replaced with guilt. He realizes that Arisu only lashed out at Takeru because Takeru killed one of his best friends, and Aguni did the same thing but doubled, which makes him no better if not worse. Aguni falls asleep, but is now racked with guilt. In the morning, Arisu is still just laying there, but Usagi isn't going to let him just lay there and die, so she gives him a similar speech to the one she did in the original show, which convinces Arisu to keep going. Just like the original show, this would have turned Arisu from selfish to selfless, and he's going to do everything in his power to help his friends and himself survive. As they enter the game, Natsu realizes she's kind of cooked and Usagi is severely wounded, so she's really fatigued and weak. Even if she was able to jump, she wouldn't be able to jump for long. Natsu is stubborn and insists she doesn't need Kuina's help. This means Arisu would help Natsu cross the bridge, leaving Kuina to help Usagi. However, Usagi doesn't want to put Kuina's life at risk more than it already is, so she refuses to let Kuina carry her and says she can cross herself. Then the game would begin. Chishiya would point out that someone is probably going to use the player 96 strategy, so they should either go first or wait until last, but by the time they decide, people are already crossing. Aguni would cross first and make it successfully. He wants to help everyone after what he's done, and the first step is showing that it's possible to cross the bridge. Seiko would cross second and make it successfully. Her and Niragi have a plan to push everyone just like player 96, but Niragi was too scared to go first. Niragi would cross third and make it successfully. He'd tell Aguni his plan and Aguni wouldn't be on board, but Niragi just talks over him the second he says it's a bad idea. The last of the background characters would cross fourth and all die. Whether it's because they were pushed or just couldn't jump any longer, they all die here. Kuma would cross fifth and would sacrifice to save everyone else. He'd want Arisu and Kisaragi to make it, plus no one else is seemingly going to do it. He starts crossing, then reaches the end and then runs forward, so Niragi lunges to push him, but then he jumps backwards. He's quickly losing balance, so Aguni sees this as his time to strike, and he runs up and pushes Niragi, sending him falling into Kuma. Niragi managed to grab onto Kuma before he fell, and he won't let go no matter what, so Kuma knows the only way to secure everyone else's safety is to take Niragi down with him, so he lets himself get hit by the rope and fall. Kisaragi would cross sixth and make it successfully. Even if Seiko did try pushing her, she could easily overpower her. Usagi would cross seventh and fall into the gap in the bridge. Before Kuina can try changing her mind, she'd start running across the bridge with no help. Like mentioned, she's extremely fatigued and weak, so when it comes time for her to cross, she'd jump and fail to get over the gap. She'd fall, but luckily, she'd manage to catch herself on the bars just like player 306. She can easily catch herself when injured as she's an expert climber, however she is extremely weak from the injury and she's already drained a lot of energy just getting to this point, so she wouldn't be able to pull herself back up. Arisu would cross eighth. Kuina was just getting ready to cross, but the second he saw Usagi fall, he immediately moved Kuina out of the way and darted after Usagi. He'd jump over the gap in the middle so he can lift up Usagi and he'd be able to do it. Then they'd both cross to the end. However, he only realizes he left Natsu once he made it. Kuina would cross ninth and successfully make it. As soon as Arisu went onto the bridge, she'd give Natsu one last chance for her to get help. Then when she refused, she jumped onto the bridge to assist Arisu. She got ready to catch Arisu or Usagi if either of them fell, but they never fell and they were out of range for the majority of the time crossing. Chishiya would cross 10th and successfully make it. He would know that he'd be useless helping Natsu because if she fell, he couldn't catch her and he couldn't carry her. Plus, he just put himself at more risk. Chishiya would make it around 20 seconds before the timer ends, meaning Arisu can't go back for Natsu. Natsu would cross the bridge last and fall off after landing on her foot, causing her to fall over and be hit by the rope. Since the X team will win the vote, I had to change things up a little. Seiko would stay O. This was never going to change no matter how far into the game she made it. She seemed like she was having fun taking innocent lives and had a massive smile on her face when she was restraining Usagi, so she clearly enjoys hurting others. By this point, she will have enough to clear her debts and she probably would have had enough for a while, but she continued voting O. Every game she survived and every time she pressed O, she would have became a little more sadistic and greedy. Although she has more than enough to clear her debts, she persists in pressing O because she is trying to maximize the amount of money she can make, and this is the only chance she's ever going to get in her life to cause this much devastation to others and get away with it. She's not only participating in the games for money, she's also participating for her entertainment and satisfaction. This means she will vote O no matter what. Aguni is broken at this point, struggling to cope with the loss of his best friend. I will go deeper into this later, but essentially he's unstable and all it takes is for one thing to go wrong for him to snap. Kazuya and Kisaragi have been teammates since Tug of War. In the show, Kazuya ended up sacrificing for everyone in the Kick the Can game because they saved his life by turning him into a zombie, and therefore he feels like he owes his life to them. Kisaragi is his only surviving friend now and he remembers the multiple times Arisu and his friend saved him in Mingle. He probably has enough to clear his debts now. His friend Kisaragi also has enough to clear her debts, but earlier in the games, their alliance promised that if anyone died, they'd help each other's families with the prize money, like Sang-woo wanted his mother helped or say Bi-yak wanted her mother and brother helped. Therefore, she'd still want more money, but it's not with malicious or greedy intent. It's so she can use the remains of her money after paying off her debt to honor her friends after they died. Kazuya would have agreed to that deal, and the only reason they voted X before is because Kuma believed they should. That is 3 people who are going to vote O and the rest will vote X. That means that either 2 people have to die or 2 people have to switch their votes. The dinner scene starts. All players eat their food, and a guard comes in to announce that the voting will be conducted tomorrow so players can truly consider their options. However, just like in Season 1, when the guards are cleaning up, they leave the knives on the table. Everyone takes their knife, some hesitantly. Kuina, Chishiya, Usagi, and Arisu all push their beds together to make a mini fort. They decide to take turns taking watch. Chishiya takes first, Kuina takes second, Arisu takes third, and Usagi takes the last. On the other side of the room, Kisaragi and Kazuya take turns, but not to keep watch. Instead, they're waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Once one of them get tired, they wake the other one up and then the other one watches and waits for someone to fall asleep. Seiko was planning to make a move, but once she saw them keeping watch, she ended up falling asleep. Aguni is pretending to be asleep, but he's not risking being killed in the night, even if it means not getting any sleep. Eventually, it's Arisu's turn to wake Usagi up, but she's already fatigued, so she needs the rest, and also she might end up falling asleep anyway. However, this was a mistake, because soon after Arisu decides to take Usagi's watch, he ends up falling asleep. Then, Kazuya and Kisaragi get ready. Kazuya doesn't want Arisu to die for the previously mentioned reasons. They need at least 4 people to play the next game, but they don't want to risk their lives in the last game, so they'd much rather end it here. That's why Arisu is going to be the only one kept alive and no one else. They could just keep all X's alive and only kill Seiko so there's no more game, but they won't have enough money. Kisaragi goes to Usagi first. Since she's already injured, she'd go the quickest, making her the least likely to scream and wake up the others. Meanwhile, Kazuya sneaks over to Aguni and takes out his knife. Simultaneously, Kisaragi stabs Usagi and then Kazuya swings at Aguni, but he quickly rolls out of the way and counters it. They start fighting, but the guards rush in. All players are forced to drop their knives. However, Chishiya steals Usagi's knife when no one is looking, meaning he is the only one who has won. Arisu realizes what has happened. He fell asleep, which led to Usagi's death. Aguni's rage comes flooding back after Kisaragi and Kazuya tried killing him and everyone else in the night, and the only thing stopping him from attacking Kazuya are the guards. Kisaragi and Kazuya need more money, so they decide to play one last game. I think Seiko's vote is obvious. Finally, Aguni switches to O. He is desperate for revenge. As soon as the games are over, he'll probably never see Kazuya or Kisaragi again, and even if he does, he won't be able to attack them. Therefore, this last game is his one and only chance to get revenge. As the elevator rises, Chishiya notices the loose pole but keeps the information to himself. Once they reach the top, they listen to the rules. After pressing the button, Kazuya and Kisaragi walk to the corner to discuss their plan. Arisu, Chishiya, and Kuina walk to the other corner. Aguni just stands there, waiting for a moment to attack. Seiko is bored and wants a fight, but she can't win against Aguni. She can't win against Kazuya and Kisaragi. Then she can't win against Arisu, Kuina, and Chishiya. Kazuya and Kisaragi can easily beat Seiko, Arisu, Kuina, and Chishiya. Out of everyone here, Aguni and Seiko are the obvious picks to sacrifice. As soon as Aguni is gone, they are easily the strongest, so they can just pick who they want to kill. Seiko would be gone on Tower 2, meaning on the last tower they'd have to pick someone from Arisu's group. They decide to cross that bridge when they come to it, but for right now, they need to take Aguni out. Once Aguni is gone, they have the power. Meanwhile, Arisu is trying to create a perfect plan, but time is ticking. They eventually have a plan, but suddenly Seiko starts talking. She states that Aguni is the strongest here and can easily overpower everyone. The only chance they have of taking him down is this tower. As soon as one person is gone, they won't be strong enough even with everyone combined. Once that happens, Aguni can just pick who he wants to kill, and she says that he's voted O the entire game, meaning he's greedy and just wants money. Seiko saying all this starts to infuriate Aguni and he gets riled up. This burst of aggression from Aguni was planned, and now things are going the way Seiko intended. Aguni now looks unstable and ready to snap any moment, which reinforces the idea that he's just going to kill everyone so he can get all the money for himself. Kisaragi and Kazuya agree with everything Seiko is saying and are vocal about this. Then, Kuina also says she is on board with this plan. Arisu and Chishiya know that this is just going to get everyone killed because they've just set Aguni off. Nothing is going to calm him down. All it takes is one swing and a 6 versus 1 turns into a 5 versus 1, then a 4, then a 3, then a 2, and then a 1. Everyone else is also expecting everyone to stop fighting after one person is going to be eliminated, but Aguni isn't going to do that. However, it's too late. Kuina, Seiko, Kisaragi, and Kazuya all charge in. On his own, Kazuya probably stands the best chance against Aguni. That's the only reason Seiko's plan might have worked. Because of this, Aguni is actually managed to be pushed all the way from the middle of the tower to the edge. Abruptly, Aguni's fist swings full force into Kuina and she is sent rolling across the tower. Chishiya gives Arisu the knife, then he sneaks over to the pole. Arisu helps Kuina to her feet and tells her not to go back into battle. Soon after, Kisaragi and Seiko are also knocked down, leaving Kazuya and Aguni wrestling. Then, Aguni and Kazuya both simultaneously notice Chishiya charging in with the pole. Aguni is slightly stronger, so he is able to pull Kazuya towards him as he steps back, which results in Kazuya getting hit by the pole and he is knocked off balance. Then, Aguni finishes him off by kicking him, sending him off the platform. Aguni isn't done there, however. Like Chishiya and Arisu predicted, he's going to keep going until he's the only one left. He charges over to Seiko, but Arisu, Kuina, and Chishiya all stand in the way. Arisu is holding the knife, Chishiya is holding the pole, and Kuina has her fists. Aguni can overpower them, but just when he's about to try, Kisaragi and Seiko get to their feet and join in. Aguni still knows he can overpower them, but the round suddenly ends. Even though the round is over, Aguni still attacks. He doesn't care if people die in between rounds. He tackles Kisaragi to the ground since she's the strongest and has no weapon. As the bridge to the next platform emerges, Kuina runs across and jumps to grab the pole. Quickly, she runs back and slams the pole into Aguni's head. This disorientates Aguni, giving everyone else time to cross to the platform, but as soon as Aguni recovers, he comes darting over. Arisu knows that they are all cooked unless Aguni calms down, which is highly unlikely. He channels his rage to the person who instigated him, which was Seiko. Kisaragi tries stopping him, but it's no use. Chishiya presses the button and then him and Kuina just watch as Aguni harries Seiko and Kisaragi. Eventually, Seiko is on the corner of the tower and Kisaragi is dazed on the floor. Aguni is about to kick Seiko off, but Arisu jumps in front of Aguni and takes the blow. He begs Aguni to stop and doesn't try fighting back. He quickly recovers and continues begging Aguni, but Aguni just grabs him and throws him behind him so he can finish off Seiko. Just when she's about to die, Arisu calls out Takaru's player number. He doesn't know Takaru's name, but the player number still causes him to hesitate. Just like how he did in the 10 of Hearts game, Arisu is able to figure out everything he needs to calm Aguni down just from his actions and the look in his eye. He gets up to his feet and starts his speech. He mentions how he knows Takaru was his best friend before the games and how Aguni felt like the games and the money started to turn Takaru crazy. Aguni had no idea who or what caused it, but he felt almost guilty that he let this happen to his friend and he didn't know how to cope with the immense sadness and guilt and anger. He almost felt like he needed someone to blame for this. After all, this was his best friend. He found it almost impossible to admit that his friend was always sort of depraved and the games just brought the true Takaru out. However, there was no one to blame for this. He still felt like he had to find someone to blame, so the easiest person to direct that blame and anger to were Arisu and Karube, as they were the ones who caused Takaru's death. Once Karube was killed, none of these emotions went away, so he believed he also had to finish Arisu off. Once he tried finishing Arisu off, he couldn't bring himself to do it. Instead, the guilt just intensified after he truly realized what he had done and how Arisu lost both of his best friends just like him but worse. But the feeling that he had to blame someone also persisted. Instead, he shifted the blame to the people Takaru surrounded himself with. The only two of those remaining were Niragi and Seiko. Deep down, he knew Niragi respected him, so he could have just restrained him or talked him down, but instead he decided to kill him. After that, there was just more guilt, so he expanded the blame to every voter. Once Kisaragi and Seiko die, the blame is going to go to Kuina as she voted in favor of sacrificing Aguni first. Then when Kuina dies, he'll shift the blame to Chishiya since he tried killing him with the pole. Finally, it'll go back to Arisu. Once Arisu dies, he'll have no one else to blame, but the emotions won't go away. That'll leave him forever in anguish, and he'll be dissatisfied for the rest of his life because he could never properly cope with Takaru's downfall and demise. If Aguni stays on the path he's currently on, he might have won the games, but he fell into the Game Master's trap. However, if he stops now, then the Game Master won't win. Instead of placing the blame on the players, he can direct the anger towards the Game Master. However, there's currently no way to take down the Game Master that they know of, so the only thing he can do now is stop his pursuit of revenge, or else he lost the actual psychological game. To do this, he needs to accept that Takaru was always a little crazy, but that side was just suppressed until the game maker manipulated the games to bring that side of him out. After he's done that, he'll be able to calm down and stop killing everyone for no reason. He ends his speech begging for Aguni to stop, and Aguni knows that everything Arisu said was true. However, Seiko jumps over from behind him and tries pushing him off until Aguni swings his arm and sends her flying off. Arisu is petrified that his plan didn't work, but Aguni doesn't continue his rampage. Instead, he just stands there. As the timer starts to run low, Kisaragi says that she doesn't want to be a sacrifice and they can decide amongst themselves who dies. Then she takes a step backwards and falls. The three ex-voters are horrified and preparing for a battle to the death. Arisu grabs the last pole, and now all three of them have a pole as well as Arisu's knife. However, once Aguni presses the button, he turns to Arisu and says his final words, then he sacrifices for everyone. The front man was trying to twist him into a selfish monster, but instead he went against the front man and became a selfless hero who sacrificed his life to save everyone. The three winners stand in the center of the tower as the elevator takes them to the bottom and the games are over. Since I established, or at the very least implied all the way back in the intro, the Squid Games in this universe are basically a variation of Borderland for people in debt. The winners would not only get to continue living, but also get to turn their life around with the money. The frontman, who is the equivalent of the watchman, would specially pick all 456 people every time a disaster this big happens to make it as entertaining as possible for the VIPs. That would mean that all three winners would return to the real world, and all 453 other people would be dead from the meteorite. Before being sent back to the real world, they'd be given the option to become VIPs, which is basically the equivalent of citizens, or to return back to the living world. They'd all choose to decline it, and then Arisu would be put into that memory thing or whatever it was where he got to talk to Karube and Chota one last time, and things play out nearly identical except one difference. Instead of joking about how they died from their heads exploding, Karube and Chota would joke about how they died in the games instead. The memory then pauses, and time slows around Arisu. Just like how Gi-hun got a chance to speak to the frontman in the car at the end of Season 1, Arisu would get to speak to the watchman. The watchman would tell Arisu that he gets one question he can ask. Once his question is answered, he's sent back to the real world and wakes up in the hospital where his brother is there, and their conversation plays out basically the same. Arisu would then go on to turn his life around. He would have forgotten everything that happened in Borderland. Unless American Squid Game does actually happen and there's an Alice in Borderland Season 4, Arisu will never return to the games as he's no longer in debt, plus he forgot all about it. When his life ends many decades later and he does inevitably get sent to Borderland, he's no longer in debt, so he'd be sent to the real Borderland we know and not the Squid Game version. However, I will be doing another video, except this time it's the opposite, with Squid Game characters being sent to Alice in Borderland instead of the other way around. There'll also most likely be a Stranger Things version of this one, so those two videos will be releasing sometime within the next few months hopefully. That's everything for the video. If you want to make your own video, then the tier list and all the character names should be in the description. Thanks for watching, bye bye.